Welcome to Alasquatch, the show all about Bigfoot in the great state of Alaska. I'm your host, Beans Baxter. So lace up your boots, zip up your coat, and come with me on an adventure as we explore all things cryptid in the last frontier. Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in to Alasquatch. I have got a special treat for you today, but first I want to be sure and mention, head on over to the Alasquatch Facebook page and check out the trailer for Extreme Expeditions Northwest's new documentary, Bigfoot Encounters in the Pacific Northwest. It's a film that chronicles our expedition last year into Stevens County, Washington. I think it's going to be something really special. I'm really proud of it. I think you guys are really going to like it. So give that a click and a watch when you get a chance. Also, today I have a special treat in that I interviewed Mr. David Weatherly. He's the author of several books, but the one that we discussed specifically today is his newest release, Monsters of the Last Frontier, Cryptids and Legends of Alaska. I think it's... if you're listening to Alasquatch, I think it's something you'll really be interested in. It's all about Alaska cryptids. There's Kushtakas, Thunderbirds, Bigfoot, anything you can think of. All kinds of Alaskan legends and lore, and it's a great book. And well, let's get into the interview. So just check it out, listen all the way to the end, and he will tell you how to get a hold of the book and read it for yourself. So without further ado, let's get into it. All right, so here we are with author and researcher David Weatherly, the author of Cryptid Legends of Alaska, and we're going to talk a little bit about his book. How are you doing, David?
Hey, Larry, how you doing today?
Oh, living the dream.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, so, the book is all about Alaska cryptids. What made you decide to write a book about Alaska cryptids?
Well, there's a few reasons. One, nobody's done it. Two, last year I started what has turned into a series of examining cryptids in specific states. So far, a book on Arizona came out, and then a book on Nevada, and the third one that you have in your hands, I believe, is Monsters of the Last Frontier, Cryptids and Legends of Alaska, and it's strictly on all the various cryptids in that state.
Excellent. And I'm not quite through the book yet, but I'm almost done with it, and so far I'm really enjoying it. The cover is just amazing. That's one of the coolest interpretations of a Kushtaka I've ever seen. I always throw in a plug for this guy. That artist is Sam Sheeran, and he's done a lot of covers for me over the years. And we kind of came up with this concept together. The first one that came out was Silver State Monsters, all about Nevada. And I told him, I said, that's what I want on the cover. I said, but hey, if you can, hide a couple of the other cryptids or something on the back of the book. So he did this full wraparound cover. And he's done it for all three of the states so far, and there's more coming this year. But when he did, when we came up with this one, I told him, I said, look, I want a Kushtaka, a land otter man on the front, And I thought it was a real challenge because, if anybody that knows anything about this cryptid, we're talking about basically a giant bipedal otter. And that's a tough thing to depict and not make it look, goofy or something. But he came out with this incredible piece of artwork. And, anybody that takes a look at the cover will see that he really did it justice. Yeah, I'm really impressed with it because, you've got the Kushtaka and some large, possibly Thunderbirds here on the front. And then if you turn it over, you've got a sea monster or lake monster. You've got a Bigfoot footprint. It's a wraparound cover, and it's just stunning.
Yeah, it's quite a piece of artwork.
Yeah, and there's also a lot of great illustrations in the book too, as well as some pictures. Alaska. You can't have Alaska without some scenery, right?
That's right, and typically what I'm doing with this, the idea behind this series is to kind of capture the essence of those old-fashioned, bestiaries they used to call them, or the really old style cryptozoology book that covers the stories and the facts that we have, but also incorporates some of the legends and the folklore, because I think that's a very important component when we're examining these things, to go back to the native legends and the folklore of the region and things like that, and really dig in to see how it connects with what's going on in modern day. And as a result, what I've been doing with the series is, of course, incorporating photographs from my travels to the area, but also my graphics guy comes up with these really vintage illustrations of different monsters and things that he incorporates in. So I'm really happy with how the series has been coming out.
Yes, I haven't checked any of those out. I have read some of the Woodknock books that you've put together, but I haven't checked out any of the other states there. And writing about these states, was there anything particularly uniquely challenging about writing about Alaska?
Oh, sure. Several things, actually. First of all, when I did the first two I did, Arizona and Nevada, it was pretty easy to basically cover everything pretty thoroughly. Nevada, I think, probably has, I don't want to say it has absolutely every sighting, but it really has, most of the sightings that have happened over, through history in that state that we're aware of. But when it came to Alaska, and there are so many sightings, for instance, of Sasquatch, I mean, there's no way. You'd have to have several volumes just to cover those sightings. So what I had to do was really try to give a good overview of Bigfoot encounters in the state of Alaska. And of course, I plucked out a few specific regions that I looked at in particular, but then also tried to give a good basic coverage of the nature of what the encounters are like there in the state, because every place is unique. The other challenge, of course, was I typically, as I stated earlier, really like to dig into folklore, Native American legends of the region, because I think it's important to address those. And a lot of researchers, sadly, over the years have ignored those aspects and just said, "Oh, it's just folklore, it's just superstition, or it's just mythology," and that really is not always the case. They have Native tribes have a different worldview, and a lot of these things they're talking about, they talk about in a spiritual sense, but they're also talking about their physical reality and things that their people have experienced. So I feel it's very important to address that aspect. I always try to do so with the utmost respect when I'm doing that. Alaska was interesting because, the state recognizes, quote, 227 separate tribes. So we're talking about a lot of unique perspectives. Now, obviously there's a lot of interrelation, connectedness between those tribes, but, even taking a percentage of that, we're talking about a lot of fascinating material. So I tried to bring some of that into the book too.
Yeah, and I noticed, you mentioned in the book, which is something I've ran into quite a bit in my own researches, the natives can be pretty tight-lipped about these things. They don't really enjoy talking about them, especially with outsiders.
Absolutely. I've been very blessed over the years. I've been doing this stuff since the 1970s, and when I was young, I became very interested, not just in supernatural, weird topics, but also in shamanism and different magical traditions. And, as a result over the years, I've studied with a lot of different elders from around the world, not just native cultures. And, I'm well aware that there are certain ways you have to approach these things and talk to people, because you are an outsider, when you're going in and trying to discuss these things. But, at the same time, people are people, and if they understand that you're being respectful and if you approach it correctly, that alone can open some doors. And, one of the things that you run into with some of these topics, and this is really all over the world with traditional cultures, is that there are certain things that are taboo for them to talk about. So, you have to understand that it might not be just because you're an outsider. It might be because, they can't talk about that, except under certain circumstances. But interesting enough, times are changing. These topics are so much a part of mass media and everything else now that it is slowly helping a lot of these people open up and, take a different approach on their own. And, what I really hope to see in the future is more Native people who are delving into these topics and discussing them and publishing material. I'd love nothing more than see some, a Native elder publish a book about some of these things to share their knowledge.
Yeah, it's really fascinating to get their take on things and to hear their stories. Last year at the Sasquatch Roundup, a member of the Colville tribe came and spoke, and his presentation was incredible. He was telling stories that had probably never been told outside the reservation, and it was actually something that was pretty special. So,
that's nice. One of the things that has caused a lot of reluctance among different tribal peoples is that you have to understand, for decades they were kind of laughed at for these stories. So over time that led to, I'm not going to share this with the crazy white guys. They're just going to laugh at me or think it's, nonsense or superstition or something. So again, I think that's one of the actual benefits from this stuff becoming more part of popular culture is that it's leading to some openness.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see how the stigma of the subject, it just doesn't affect witnesses, but it affects like an entire culture.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that being said, what was your favorite Alaska cryptid to research for the book?
Oh man, that's tough to narrow down. I'm actually going to fudge that answer and give you two. So the first one I think would probably be the Kushtaka, and there's different ways to pronounce that even. It's a really tricky topic to delve into. Anybody that's a little bit familiar with it will know that we're into a cryptid that does have a lot of the spiritual components I referred to a few minutes ago. It roughly translates as land otter man. It's what's on the cover of the book, and it's exactly what it sounds like, a giant bipedal otter. Now, when you start delving into these stories, over the years, one thing that's happened is a lot of Sasquatch researchers have become convinced that stories of this creature are just stories of hairy man, Bigfoot.
Right.
And in my experience, talking to various tribal members and elders, they're very insistent that it is not. Now, to further support that, when you go to these various tribes that talk about these various regions where the tribes talk about the Kushtaka, you'll find that they have other terms for Bigfoot. And it is a very distinct, separate thing. So, we could easily, obviously, spend several hours talking about this topic, but in essence, we're talking about a creature that is a shapeshifter. And a lot of the stories, they were once humans that are transformed into these land otter people. And that's where we get into the spiritual components, the very shamanic mixture of this idea that someone can go to another world, so to speak, that they can transform into something that is not quite human. And there are different modern interpretations of that get very interesting and sort of spiritual / psychological, and we won't delve into all that. But just on a base level, it's a pretty fascinating set of stories that go with this creature. The other thing that really intrigued me a lot when I delved into Alaskan lore was this idea of surviving woolly mammoths. And I think that's one of the things that intrigues me, because not all cryptids are completely unknown, undiscovered animals. The most famous example of that would be the thylacine in Australia, which also really fascinates me. It's an animal that's documented. There's photographs. There's video footage of it up until the 1930s when it went extinct. And, ever since that time, more and more there are constantly reports and purported sightings of this creature. So it's that idea that something could survive, even against the odds and against the appearance of what science says. And in Alaska, we had this idea of these surviving woolly mammoths. Now, when you really delve into it, you find out that, no, we're not saying there's a herd of mammoths running around the tundra right now. But what's intriguing is that you find that there are some interesting anecdotes and stories about mammoths surviving perhaps much later than is commonly accepted. And, even stories that date into the 1800s, not just in Alaska, but in Siberia and some other colder regions. Again, some of this is native tales talking about hunting these creatures, in their recent history. So we get this possibility, this intriguing possibility that maybe these creatures survived much later than common history says.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think Alaska was probably one of the last strongholds, if you will, for the mammoth, and it wouldn't surprise me if there was some running around as early or as recent as the last couple of 100 years.
Absolutely, yeah. That's pretty much where I stand on it too, and I think it's just very fascinating. It would be really cool to imagine that there are still some out there somewhere, but I think the odds are pretty slim on that, unfortunately.
Yeah, I agree with that. But I mean, you never know. Alaska's so massive, and it's not it's not like we've taken a magnifying glass and looked at the whole state. So I'm certain there are species here, more mundane species. I think there were some squirrels or something that was discovered just here in the last few years living up here that a new species of squirrel. And
right.
I'm convinced there's more species of mammals that we're not, probably different kinds of wolves and stuff like that we're not familiar with that are running around up here.
Well, and it's intriguing too, because one of the things that I tell people, when they ask me about these different Alaskan cryptids and everything, I say, look, go online and Google and put the state of Alaska, the outline of it, over top the lower 48. And look at how much space it covers. People who haven't been to Alaska or who haven't really looked into it don't realize how massive the state is. And, especially when you incorporate all the islands and everything else, I mean, we're talking about a massive amount of territory with a very small number of humans. And there's this common misconception in the United States, and actually it's probably worldwide, but there's this common misconception that, humans have been everywhere and checked out everything. So you hear this all the time from skeptics, that, it couldn't be a Sasquatch out there because, it would be seen every day and it would be, we would know. And that always kind of cracks me up. I typically use as an example the state of Utah. I tell people, look at a map of Utah and look at the two main interstates that go through the state. They form more or less a cross in the state. And I said, then understand that the bulk of the population of that state lives along the corridor of those two interstates. Now, there are some rural areas. There are the towns that are off the beaten track and so forth. But, when you start breaking that down, you're talking about vast amounts of territory where there's not a human walking across it every day because, there's no Starbucks or whatever that they're doing their daily trek to. So there's so much vast territory in this country that is unexplored that absolutely there's room and space for these creatures to exist.
Yeah, and I tell people all the time, even here on the Kenai Peninsula, there are places where you could get dropped off and walk for the rest of your life and never see another person.
Exactly.
Yeah, and
exactly.
People have.
And that's not even the most remote. I mean, my gosh, you go up into the northern portions of the state, and it's even more remote.
Yeah, the Kenai Peninsula is not even really that big. I think it's only like 120 miles long or something.
Right.
But there are some very, very remote places here, and you could easily walk for the rest of your life before you found civilization again.
Yeah.
But anyway, because it's Alaska, we got to talk about Bigfoot, man. So what is your theory on Bigfoot? What do you think it is?
So, anybody who delves into this topic, of course, you find out even starting out, you find out very quickly that there's a couple different camps, and a lot of people think that it's basically just an undiscovered ape, North American ape. There's sort of subsets. Some people think, it's related to Gigantopithecus. And then you have the other camp that goes in a very different direction and says, no, they're supernatural creatures. They're, you get kind of the, shall we say, very interesting theories. They were dropped off some UFOs, or they're psychic and all these different things. And, my take on it, I guess a lot of my influence is from dealing with various Native American people over the years who do view the creature as a very physical, tangible being, but they also say that it has some unique qualities. And, my take on it is that it's a physical, tangible creature, but that it has abilities we just don't understand yet. Now, we can go out there a little bit and say, well, it has some things that could sort of classify as paranormal, and that usually gets the traditional cryptozoologists really antsy and worked up. But my point is that I tell people to view it this way. Look, imagine the first person that ever saw a chameleon. They're looking at a lizard, it's just laying on a branch or a tree or something, and one minute it's there, it's this, bright green animal, and the next minute it seems to fade away. Well, obviously we scientifically understand what chameleons can do now, that they can blend into their surroundings, and they can, there are things about their makeup that allow them to do that. So, I believe that Sasquatch are physical, tangible creatures, but they have something, and whether it's akin to that or whether it's something else, it's something that allows them to appear to be somewhat supernatural. It's just, what's the old adage that magic is just science we don't understand yet.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, there's so many accounts. I have spoken to so many people who have seen a Sasquatch, and something weird happens. It seems to vanish, or it just, it was running and then it was just gone. It ducked behind a tree. It never came back out. Okay, well, I think we're looking at something that this creature is able to do that we just don't quite comprehend yet. Now, whether it's some kind of chameleon-like ability, it could be something. It could be something akin to infrasound, because I've heard a lot of people who've had experiences that sound like they're being affected by infrasound when they've encountered these creatures. And, maybe what they're able to do is interfere with the human consciousness or brain or vision or something that allows them to seem to disappear. Just causes a glitch in our perception somehow. So that's sort of my take on it.
Yeah. Well, it reminds me, one of the first times I ever went deer hunting when I was a young man in Kentucky. I had a deer, running across the field in front of me, and there was a tree, in between me and the deer, and I lost sight of it as it ran behind the tree, and it never came out on the other side. And
right.
I still think about that to this day. Where did that damn deer go? And it was just a deer,
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting too, because of course now I know that you're in law enforcement, and obviously law enforcement officers are trained observers. The average person really isn't a trained observer. That's something that comes up. That you can ask people, a crowd of people, what they saw when an incident occurs, and they all saw slightly different things often, because I think the human level of perception actually has declined with the advent of cell phones. And, there's always the old joke with teenagers, being glued to their cell phones, but it's adults now too. And there's so many things that people just miss. So when you consider that, and then when you add in people who have these sightings who really aren't used to seeing anything like this, there's the shock level, and there's the whole WTF, they're trying to comprehend. what this is they're seeing, that could cause some issues with their perception too.
I agree. I think a lot of sightings are missed. I think these things get closer to people than they realize, but I think people just don't see them because they don't look up. They're not, when you're walking through the woods, especially rough terrain, you're looking at the ground and you're kind of looking at your eye level. You never look above that really, unless you're bird watching or squirrel hunting or something. You never really look up that much. And
that's right.
I think a lot of times these things are a lot closer than people realize, and they just miss them. I'm sure I've probably, missed a few, trudging through the woods, looking at my feet, trying to make sure I don't trip. And,
Sure.
I'm without a doubt, I think these things, just get overlooked a lot of times, and a lot of the sightings you hear of, they're from a distance. The people see them because they're far enough away, they see the entire thing. And, when you're closer and if you're not looking up at that 9-10 feet level, you're not going to really notice it. You're just going to, probably think it's the trunk of a tree or something.
That's right.
Yeah. And, saying that you believe there's a physical aspect to Bigfoot, how do you think that he survives in harsh winter conditions like Alaska has?
Well, there are so many creatures that do survive that environment. I think they've just adapted to it. Obviously, humans survive it, but they're inside, with their wood stove or whatever going. But then, on the other hand, we've got, bears all over Alaska. We have other mammals that do survive it. And I think that these creatures have simply adapted to the conditions and understand how to survive in those particular climates, just like they survive in other areas. And actually, Alaska is probably pretty easy for them in many regards because there are so many natural resources. I mean, water certainly isn't a problem. There's an abundance of game and everything else. So I think it's actually fairly simple for them to survive. And more than likely, they're intelligent enough to have, come up with some kind of way to stay warm, whether they've created dens or some kind of nesting sites or whatever they've done. I'm sure that they've figured that out because there's a long, long history of sightings in Alaska, that's for sure.
Yeah, I agree. I think they just they can just handle it. I mean, moose and bear do. So
that's right.
Why not one more animal?
Right, and they are hair covered, so
yeah,
they have something akin to fur or hair that helps with their keep their body heat in. So yeah, absolutely.
I do kind of have my own little theory that they have maybe a thicker muscle structure than we do. I think that would almost like a natural Kevlar weave. I think that would explain a lot of the accounts of them getting shot and just seeing them to shake it off and keep going.
That would make a lot of sense.
Yeah. And it would probably also insulate them a little bit better, too, from the cold. Is there a particular Bigfoot story that is your favorite? Or Alaska Bigfoot story?
Well, there's the Port Chatham / Port Lock story that we've spoken a little bit about in private, and we can address that some. There are some other really cool accounts. I personally find the sightings around Lake Iliamna pretty fascinating. First of all, Lake Iliamna, of course, is the spot of Alaska's most famous water monster. And, on top of that, there are all these hairy man sightings that have occurred around the lake itself. And there's a really fascinating account that it sounds bad. It's almost stereotypical Alaskan. I think, that rugged outdoors type of thing, take no crap attitude, I guess. But there was a guy, his name was Coffee, outside of Lake Iliamna, around the lake, who was driving and saw one of these creatures crossing the road. His reaction was to jump out with a .357 Magnum and take a shot at it. And it's like, okay, there's kind of Alaska through and through, and it was, but it was an interesting story because, they later found some physical evidence around the area. They thought, of course, there's the common assumptions at the time. Oh, was he drinking, or what's this? They were probably calling him, what's this Yahoo out there, just shooting at a bear or something. But no, they found a set of tracks, and they found that it was a very difficult area for a human to navigate, and some other interesting things that came up around the time, and there were other sightings around the lake during the same period of people reporting this hairy man. And again, that's one of those things that goes pretty far back in traditional lore of the region that, oh yeah, there's a Bigfoot or, a hairy man that lives around Lake Iliamna. And, that makes a lot of sense because, again, there's the resources. There's fresh water, there's, an abundance of fish and other game around the water. It's like the old adage that, the wildlife gravitates towards the fresh water. And, if it's a predator, they're going to gravitate both for the water and for the game that they can hunt. So it makes a lot of sense to me that it would be a hot spot for sightings.
Yeah, I want to get over there one of these days and check it out. It's technically not too far away from me. It's just getting access to get over there. That's the hard part.
That's right.
Yeah. Mr. Coffee is also one of the, his account is one of the few that I've ever heard Bigfoot described as having a pot belly.
Right. And that's kind of funny. I almost heard something a few moments ago when you were talking about the muscular structure because it's interesting, a lot of mammals, like bears and so forth, have extra fat they put on during the winter season. But how often do you hear reports of a fat Bigfoot? You really pretty much don't. I mean, they're always described as basically being, it's very muscular, large, of course. But you just don't hear, it looked like a really obese Bigfoot, walking by. So, I don't know, the potbelly thing is kind of weird. Now, there's also, of course, the potential that it was a female that was pregnant.
Oh, that's true. I didn't consider that. Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, I was thinking maybe that might be our best chance to get one is to find a fat one. So, David, if you think that Bigfoot's ever proven real, I think probably it's going to take a body to do that. But if you ever think finally, the government and science acknowledges that it's real and that it's out there, what do you think that kind of disclosure or discovery would do to the tourism industries in places like, Washington and Montana and Alaska, places, that are very heavily wilderness tourist areas?
Wow. It's going to be interesting. That's for sure. I think that's kind of a wild card in terms of the tourism, but I do think that sadly what you'll have happen is that once it's proven real, which, is going to happen at some point, whether it be in our lifetime or not, I'm not sure, but once it is proven real, I think one thing that'll happen is a rush of scientific organizations and hunters and everything else who are going to flood in looking for a specimen. And that's kind of the sad reality of how people are going to react, because if it is proven via a kill, then where is that body going? Some institution is going to get a hold of it. And when that happens, other scientific institutions and organizations around the world are going to be doing everything they can to get their own specimen, as well as, looking for a live capture. So it could turn out to be very chaotic unless it is somehow regulated or controlled in fairly short order. And then there's the whole question that people have about this creature's level of intelligence. And that gets into kind of a fascinating area because, there's a lot of hunters who claim to have had these things in their sights and couldn't shoot it because it looked too human. So, we really don't know for a fact where this thing falls on the evolutionary scale. And that's going to dictate a lot of how it's dealt with going forward.
That's true. So who would be its advocate? Would it be PETA or would it be the who are the human rights people? You know who I'm talking about? Right. Yeah. Yeah. Would it be PETA or would it be somebody else?
Gosh, I don't know.
Yeah.
I really don't know.
All right. Well, David, tell us where people can pick up this amazing tome you've written.
So, of course, it's on Amazon, and you can also catch the link to it at my website, which is and that is EERIELIGHTS.com. You'll also find links to my other books, various interviews and projects I'm involved with, upcoming appearances, articles, and a whole mass of other things. There's also an Erie Lights Facebook page you can follow, and an Instagram profile as well.
All right, David. Well, thanks so much for coming on, man. I had a great time talking to you, and we'll have to have you on again sometime.
Definitely, Larry. Anytime. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, and next time you get up here, man, we'll have to get together. I can take you out and show you some places, and maybe we can get over to Port Chatham.
Oh, man, we'll do it.
All right, sounds good. All right, bye-bye. And a very big thank you to David for coming on the show. I really appreciated it. I had a great time talking to you both on and off the air. And for the rest of you, you can find me on the Alasquatch Facebook page. You can find us on the Alasquatch Twitter, and you can email us at alasquatch@gmail.com. I hope you guys enjoyed the show. I hope you guys enjoyed the interview, and I'll be back soon with some more Alasquatchy goodness.